The photograph arrived in a box of military memorabilia that had been stored in a barn in rural Pennsylvania for more than 70 years, preserved by accident rather than intention, surviving through the negligence of an estate that had forgotten about its wartime treasures. An estate sale company had contacted me after discovering that the property owner had accumulated numerous items related to World War II. Photographs, uniforms, documents, personal effects accumulated over decades. The company knew about my work investigating forgotten wartime innovations and the contributions of ordinary soldiers, and they were hoping I might be interested in examining the collection before it went to auction. I drove to Pennsylvania on a cold November afternoon, understanding that I was probably chasing another dead end, another collection of standard military photographs and common memorabilia that had survived for no particular reason. But I've learned through years of research that extraordinary stories often hide inside collections that appear ordinary at first glance, that profound historical truths frequently conceal themselves within mundane objects. The barn was a time capsule of extraordinary density, decades of accumulated military items, some carefully preserved and others deteriorating badly, filled shelves and storage containers scattered throughout the structure. Most of it was standard military memorabilia, uniforms, insignia, unit patches, garrison caps, the kind of equipment and documentation that any veteran might have kept as souvenirs of their service. I moved through the collection systematically, examining items, understanding that I was looking for something specific, though I didn't yet know what that something might be. But then I found a folder containing photographs from a Sherman tank crew. The images were taken in October 1944, somewhere in Europe, probably France or Germany based on the background details visible in some frames. The crew stood informally beside their tank, wearing the distinctive tanker uniforms and protective headgear of Armored Corps personnel. Most of the photographs were standard crew portraits, men posing with their equipment, documenting their unit, creating memories of service that they hoped would survive the war. The images conveyed camaraderie and a peculiar mixture of confidence and exhaustion that characterized combat soldiers who had survived enough operations to develop both competence and awareness of danger. But one photograph was different from the others in ways that only became apparent when I examined it carefully under magnification. In this image, one of the crew members, positioned as a gunner based on his uniform insignia and his position in relation to the tank, was holding something small, almost invisible in the black and white photograph. The object appeared to be a mirror or a reflective surface of some kind, something no larger than a man's hand, deliberately held so that it was visible in the frame. On the back of the photograph, in careful handwriting that suggested the writer had taken time with the notation, someone had written, "Detroit, Michigan, October 1944, Tommy's mirror, the thing that saved our lives." He never told the brass about it. Nobody knew until the end. I examined the photograph under magnification equipment, studying every detail, trying to understand what I was seeing. The object in Tommy's hands was definitely a mirror. Small, delicate, carefully crafted from what appeared to be glass and metal. It looked handmade, fabricated with care, perhaps 6 inches long, positioned to reflect light in ways that seemed intentional and purposeful. But I couldn't immediately understand why a mirror of all things would be significant to tank warfare. I couldn't grasp what role such a simple object, so utilitarian and ordinary, could have played in combat operations that determined life and death for tank crews. I purchased the entire collection of photographs and documents from the Sherman tank crew, investing a substantial amount despite not yet understanding what I had found. Over the following weeks, I began researching the unit, tracking down surviving crew members through military genealogy databases and veterans organizations, trying to understand what Tommy's mirror actually was and what it had accomplished. The Sherman tank was the primary medium tank of the American forces during World War II. It was reliable, relatively easy to manufacture in the quantities that American production capacity could deliver, and effective in most combat situations. But it had a significant vulnerability that tank crews understood intimately: severely limited visibility. Tank crews operated in confined spaces, sitting in metal compartments, with restricted fields of vision that created blind spots in every direction around the vehicle. The tank commander could see through periscopes mounted on the turret, but his vision was limited to specific directions. The driver had limited visibility through a narrow slot. The gunner could only see through the gun sight toward the target he was aiming at. The loader had almost no visibility, but there were blind spots everywhere. Areas around and behind the tank that couldn't be monitored effectively. Areas where enemy forces could position themselves safely. Areas from which attacks could come without warning. These blind spots had been exploited by German forces repeatedly throughout the European campaign, resulting in tank losses that could have been prevented with better visibility, with crews having advance warning of threats. German anti-tank crews understood Sherman vulnerability and used that knowledge against American forces. German soldiers had learned to exploit the visibility limitations, to position themselves where American tank crews couldn't see them, to wait for opportunities to attack from protected positions. I contacted military history researchers specializing in armored warfare and tank tactics. I obtained official Army records related to Sherman tank operations in 1944 and 1945. I reviewed combat reports and after-action analyses from various tank companies and battalions. I searched military archives for any documentation about visibility modifications or field-fabricated equipment, and gradually, I began to understand that the U.S. Army had been searching for effective solutions to the visibility problem for months before 1944, that military engineers and tank designers had tried various approaches, but nothing had worked adequately. The solutions that had been attempted were either too complicated to fabricate in the field, or too unreliable in combat conditions, or both. The blind spot problem remained essentially unsolved as 1944 began, despite Army recognition of its critical importance. Then I found official military records of the tank crew that appeared in this photograph. Sergeant James Henderson's crew, part of a Sherman tank company operating in France and Germany in 1944 and 1945. Henderson was the tank commander, the leader of the crew. Thomas Hartley, was the gunner, responsible for aiming and firing the tank's main weapon. And according to surviving crew members I was able to locate through extensive research and interviews, Tommy had created something during the course of combat operations that changed how his crew functioned, that changed how tank visibility could be extended, that changed tank tactics in subtle but significant ways. The mystery of Tommy's mirror consumed me. What was this simple object? How had it changed tank warfare? Why had it remained unknown, unrecognized, uncredited, for more than 70 years? The strange detail wasn't just that Tommy had created a mirror. It was that this simple device, this piece of glass and metal that probably cost almost nothing to manufacture, that required no complex technology or sophisticated engineering, had enabled tactical innovations that the Army's official research and development systems hadn't thought of on their own, had solved a problem that military engineers had struggled with for months, and had done so without official authorization, without military documentation, without any formal recognition that such an innovation had even occurred. I obtained the personal papers of Sergeant James Henderson, Tommy's tank commander, from his descendants living in Ohio. Henderson had been a meticulous man who kept detailed journals of tank operations, written in his spare time, documenting crew procedures, tactical decisions, innovations that emerged from field experience. In one entry from October 1944, Henderson had written in careful script, "Tommy showed me his mirror today. I didn't understand immediately what it was for or what purpose it could serve. But then he explained the concept to me, and I understood immediately that it was brilliant. It's a small mirror on an articulated mounting that he can position through the gun sight or through various viewport openings. By angling the mirror correctly, by positioning it with precision, he can see areas of the tank that are normally invisible, areas directly behind us, areas to the sides that we can't monitor without exposing ourselves. It's such a simple concept that I'm amazed nobody thought of it before. But it works." He tested it during today's movement, and he was able to give me warnings about threats that would have otherwise been completely invisible until they attacked us. The innovation was remarkably simple in concept, elegant in its approach to solving a complex tactical problem. The mirror, positioned correctly through existing optical ports or apertures in the tank, could reflect light from areas of the battlefield that the crew couldn't normally see directly. By positioning the mirror in specific angles, by adjusting its orientation, the gunner could monitor blind spots without exposing himself or requiring modifications to the tank's structure or armor. It was a solution that cost almost nothing to manufacture, required no complex manufacturing processes, required no specialized materials, but provided a significant tactical advantage that could mean the difference between survival and destruction. But here's where the strange detail emerged in its full complexity. Tommy had created this device himself, had fabricated it entirely in the field using materials salvaged from damaged vehicles and spare parts that were available to the tank crew. He'd done this work without authorization from any officer, without informing his commanding officers through official channels, without documenting the innovation through military chain of command. He'd simply created it because he understood a problem and perceived a solution that could address that problem. When I interviewed Tommy's surviving family members, his grandson Robert Hartley, now in his 80s and living in Michigan, I learned more about the mirror and what it had enabled, what role it had played in tank operations. My grandfather was a mechanic before the war, Robert told me, sitting in his home surrounded by mechanical tools and equipment that reminded me of his grandfather's profession. He understood how to work with metal and glass. He understood optical principles. He understood the problems that tank crews faced because he talked to other crew members, listened to their concerns, understood the dangers they faced every day, and he thought about the blind spots. He thought about how many tanks had been knocked out by enemies they couldn't see. So he built a mirror. He did it on his own time, using his own skills, without asking permission, without going through official channels. The Army had eventually discovered that tank crews were mounting mirrors on their tanks, but not through official channels or through any formal command structure. Other tank crews had seen the mirror and had wanted to fabricate their own versions. Word had spread through tank units about the simple device that could extend visibility, that could provide warning of threats approaching from previously invisible directions. Officers had become aware that crews were mounting mirrors on their tanks, and they'd had to make a decision about what to do about this unauthorized modification to military equipment. The response, surprisingly given military's usual adherence to regulation, was pragmatic and even encouraging. Rather than suppressing the innovation or disciplining Tommy and other crews for unauthorized modifications to military equipment, the Army decided to study it more carefully. If the mirror worked, if it provided genuine tactical advantages, and if it could be replicated reliably using field-fabricated methods, it might be worth standardizing and adopting as official equipment. Military researchers had examined Tommy's design and similar mirrors that had been fabricated by other crews in different tank units. They conducted field tests to evaluate the mirror's effectiveness in improving visibility, in extending crew awareness, in enabling earlier detection of threats. The results of the testing were consistently positive. Mirrors provided genuine tactical advantages. Crews equipped with mirrors reported improved awareness of threats approaching from blind spots. Tank survivability appeared to improve when crews had visibility enhancement equipment. Combat effectiveness seemed to increase. The innovation was working, delivering real and measurable benefits in actual combat situations. The Army authorized tank units to fabricate and install visibility improvement mirrors. An official directive was issued permitting the modification. Optical modification kits were distributed to tank units, though these kits weren't always specifically documented as mirror apparatus in official procurement systems. Tank crews received authorization to continue improving visibility through field-fabricated equipment. The innovation had moved from unauthorized modification to officially sanctioned improvement. But during this entire process, during the research and authorization and distribution phases, Tommy was never officially credited with inventing the mirror. When the Army announced the Visibility Improvement Initiative to tank units, when they authorized the distribution of optical modification kits, The official communication described the innovation as emerging from tank crews in the field, as a collective problem-solving effort rather than as the work of any specific individual. Tommy's name didn't appear in any official documentation. His contribution was acknowledged only informally, through the gratitude and respect of his crew members and the tank crews that adopted his design and fabricated their own versions. Tommy seemed unconcerned about the lack of official recognition or formal credit. In a letter to his family from late 1944, he wrote in his practical, straightforward manner, "The mirrors are working well. Other crews are building them now. The Army is supporting it. I don't need anyone to know that I invented it. What matters is that it's helping keep tank crews alive. That's enough for me. That's all that matters in the end." Finding the truth about Tommy's mirror required me to piece together documentation from multiple sources, none of which officially acknowledged the innovation or its creator, all of which contributed partial truths to the larger narrative. I obtained declassified military documents related to tank modifications during 1944-1945, through FOIA requests and archival research. I reviewed Army reports on visibility improvements in Sherman tanks, searching for references to mirror equipment or optical modifications. I interviewed surviving tank crew members from various units who had served in Europe, asking them specifically about mirror modifications, about visibility improvement equipment, about field-fabricated innovations. I contacted military historians specializing in armored warfare and tank tactics, requesting their knowledge of visibility innovations. I consulted with engineers and optical specialists who could help me understand the technical aspects of what Tommy had created. And what emerged was a story of an innovation that had been adopted informally by tank crews, spread through military units through word of mouth and demonstration, rather than through official channels, recognized as effective by military commanders, but never officially credited to any individual. One retired Army officer, Colonel Henry Morrison, who had served as a tank company commander in 1944-1945, remembered encountering the mirror innovation in the field. "I first saw it on a tank crew that operated near us during the European campaign," Morrison told me during an interview. The gunner explained what it was: a simple mirror positioned to provide visibility into blind spots, areas that conventional tank optics couldn't monitor. I thought it was brilliant, honestly. I recognized immediately that it addressed a critical vulnerability. I authorized my crews to fabricate similar devices if they could. Other company commanders did the same. It spread through the tanker corps organically, without any formal Army directive, without any top-down authorization. By late 1944, mirrors like this were becoming standard on many tanks, even though there was no official policy about it, even though it wasn't documented in supply records. I found references to the mirror innovation in after-action reports from various tank units. The reports didn't credit any individual for the innovation, but they documented that modified observation equipment had improved crew effectiveness and awareness, had reduced instances of surprise engagement by enemy forces, had apparently improved tank survivability. One report from a tank platoon operating in Germany noted, "Modified observation equipment installed on vehicles has resulted in improved crew situational awareness and reduced instances of surprise engagement by enemy forces. Equipment appears to extend effective vision coverage and provide early warning capability. Recommend standardization of visibility improvements across all tank units." I tracked down more of Tommy's family members through genealogical research. His daughter, Margaret Hartley Thompson, now 91 years old and remarkably sharp-minded despite her age, had kept some of her father's personal papers, letters he'd written during the war to his family, sketches of the mirror design, technical notes about tank operations and visibility problems. Margaret showed me hand-drawn diagrams of the mirror apparatus, detailed sketches that demonstrated Tommy's understanding of optical principles and mechanical design, his careful thinking about the problem. "My father drew these diagrams," Margaret explained, showing me the carefully executed technical drawings, rendered in pencil with precision. "He sent them to my mother during the war, with notes explaining what the mirror did and why it was important for tank crew safety. He was proud of the innovation, I think, but not in a way that made him need public recognition. He was proud because it worked, because it helped his crew survive, because other crews could benefit from it, because the solution was elegant and simple. I located several surviving tank gunners who had served with Tommy or had operated similar mirrors that had been fabricated based on his design. They all told consistent stories. The mirror had been invented by someone in a tank crew, had spread informally through tank units, had been recognized as effective by military personnel, and had never been formally credited to any particular person. The innovation had become part of the collective knowledge of tank crews, a tactical improvement that everyone knew existed, but nobody officially acknowledged as someone's specific invention. I examined Army procurement records to determine whether mirrors were ever officially ordered or standardized for tank use. The records were incomplete. A lot of field-fabricated equipment wasn't documented in official procurement systems, wasn't logged as formal requests or authorized modifications. But there were references to optical modification kits being authorized for distribution to tank units in late 1944, though the documentation didn't specify exactly what the kits contained, or who had designed them, or what technical specifications they employed. I contacted the U.S. Army's historians at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where tank doctrine and tank history were preserved in comprehensive archives. The Army historians had some documentation about visibility modifications to Sherman tanks, but nothing that specifically credited any individual with inventing the mirror concept or articulating the visibility improvement principle. The innovation was consistently described as having emerged from tank crews in the field, part of the collective problem-solving that occurred in combat units when soldiers tried to address tactical challenges on their own. The most interesting discovery came from an interview with a tank commander who had served with Tommy's unit. He'd kept personal correspondence from 1944 that included a letter from Tommy explaining the mirror's design and function in detail. In the letter, Tommy had written in his practical, direct manner, "I built this because we needed it. If other crews want to build something similar, that's fine. I don't need anyone to know that I invented it. What matters is that it's helping keep tank crews alive. That's all that matters. That's all that should matter to anyone involved in this war. Survival. Keeping your crew alive. Keeping other crews alive. Everything else is secondary." Tommy Hartley was born in 1924 in Detroit, Michigan, in a working-class neighborhood where mechanical skills were valued and highly respected, where understanding how machines worked was considered essential knowledge, where young men learned trades as a practical pathway to stable employment and economic security. His father, Robert Hartley, worked as a mechanic at one of Detroit's major automotive factories. His mother, Elizabeth, came from a family of craftspeople and skilled workers. Her father had been a master toolmaker. Her mother's family had worked in various trades requiring precision and manual skill. Tommy grew up in an environment where mechanical thinking was normal and expected, where understanding how machines worked was encouraged from a young age, where taking things apart and rebuilding them was not just permitted, but expected behavior. By age 10, Tommy was helping his father repair cars on weekends and during his free time. By 15, he was working part-time at a garage, learning advanced mechanical skills from older technicians who recognized his talent. He understood engines intuitively, understood how metal worked, understood mechanical principles in ways that went beyond textbook learning. He was the kind of young man who could look at a mechanical problem and visualize a solution, who could fabricate parts using basic tools, who could understand how different components interacted and how to modify them to achieve different effects. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, Tommy was 17 years old. He enlisted in the Army in early 1942, wanting to serve his country, wanting to contribute to the war effort, wanting to use his mechanical skills in service of military necessity. His mechanical abilities made him valuable to the military. He was assigned to Armored Corps training and eventually to a Sherman tank crew. His pre-military experience as a mechanic made him an invaluable asset to the crew. He could maintain the tank, repair mechanical problems, understand how all the components worked together, troubleshoot issues that other crew members couldn't solve. By 1944, Tommy was an experienced tank gunner with multiple years of service and multiple combat operations. He'd served in North Africa and Sicily before participating in the D-Day invasion and the subsequent campaign across Europe. He'd survived combat operations, had fought in multiple engagements, had developed a deep and practical understanding of tank tactics and tank vulnerabilities. He'd worked closely with Sergeant James Henderson, the tank commander, developing the kind of trust and coordination that comes from surviving combat operations together. During the European campaign in 1944, Tommy became increasingly aware of a persistent and critical problem: the Sherman tank's visibility limitations. The tank's design, optimized for manufacturing efficiency and armor protection, created blind spots that enemy forces could exploit effectively. German anti-tank crews understood these visibility limitations and had learned to position themselves in directions that tank crews couldn't monitor effectively. German soldiers had learned that they could approach from blind spots and attack with a degree of safety that conventional tactics wouldn't provide. The Army had recognized this problem and had tried various solutions: additional periscopes, modified hatches, different optical arrangements, various configurations, but nothing had fully solved the visibility limitation or addressed the vulnerability it created. Tommy, with his mechanical understanding and his direct experience of the visibility problem, of the dangers created by blind spots, began thinking about potential solutions. He understood optical principles from his father's work in mechanical fields and from his own mechanical background and practical experience. He understood how mirrors worked, how reflection could extend vision beyond direct sight lines, how light behaved when bounced from reflective surfaces. And he understood the Sherman tank's configuration intimately, understood the optical ports that already existed, understood the way that equipment was arranged in the turret, understood where a mirror could be positioned without interfering with crew operations or gun function. He began sketching designs in his spare time, working on ideas during moments between operational requirements. He thought carefully about how a mirror could be positioned to provide visibility into blind spots without requiring tank modification. He understood that the mirror would need to be small enough not to interfere with gun operation, but large enough to provide useful visibility. He understood that it would need to be mounted in a way that allowed adjustment for different viewing angles and different tactical situations. In October 1944, Tommy began fabricating the mirror. He salvaged materials from damaged vehicles, glass from broken windows or damaged optical equipment, metal frames from various salvaged sources, screws and mounting hardware from spare parts that were available to tank crews. He worked in the evenings, during downtime between operational requirements, using tools available to the tank crew and the mechanical workshops that were attached to tank units. He used his mechanical skills and his optical understanding to craft something that was both functional and well-made, something that would serve its purpose reliably under combat conditions. The first mirror was crude by later standards, constructed from salvaged materials, but it worked effectively. Tommy mounted it through the gun sight, positioning it carefully so that it could reflect light from areas of the tank that were normally invisible. When the gunner looked through the gun sight, the mirror provided visibility into blind spots. It extended the crew's awareness of their surroundings without requiring any modification to the tank's structure, or armor, or basic design. Tommy showed the mirror to Sergeant Henderson. Henderson immediately understood its value, understood the potential tactical advantages it could provide. They tested it during training movements, during non-combat operations, and it worked better than either of them had anticipated. The mirror provided visibility that could save lives in combat, that could provide warning of threats, that could prevent surprise attacks. The Army eventually discovered that tank crews were modifying their vehicles with unauthorized mirror equipment, but their response was surprisingly pragmatic and even encouraging rather than punitive or restrictive. Military officers realized that if crews were voluntarily fabricating and installing mirrors, if the devices were spreading organically through tank units, if crews believed the mirrors were valuable and worth the effort to fabricate, then the innovation probably deserved official attention and study. Rather than suppressing the modification or disciplining crews for unauthorized work or unauthorized equipment, The Army decided to study the innovation and potentially standardize it. Military researchers examined Tommy's design and similar mirrors that had been fabricated by other crews in different tank units. They conducted field tests to evaluate the mirror's effectiveness in improving visibility and crew awareness. They reviewed combat reports from tank units equipped with mirrors to determine whether the devices actually improved crew survivability and combat effectiveness. They analyzed data from tank engagements to see if mirror-equipped crews suffered fewer casualties or losses. The results of this testing and analysis were consistently positive. Mirrors provided genuine tactical advantages. Crews equipped with mirrors reported improved awareness of threats approaching from blind spots. Tank survivability appeared to improve measurably. Combat effectiveness seemed to increase. The innovation was working, delivering real and measurable benefits in actual combat situations where lives depended on the effectiveness of equipment. The Army authorized tank units to fabricate and install visibility improvement mirrors. An official directive was issued permitting the modification, removing any concern that crews might face punishment or disciplinary action for unauthorized equipment. Optical modification kits were distributed to tank units, though these kits weren't always specifically documented as mirror apparatus in official procurement systems. Tank crews received authorization to continue improving visibility through field-fabricated equipment. The innovation had moved from unauthorized modification to officially sanctioned improvement. But during this entire process, the research, authorization, and distribution phases, Tommy was never officially credited with inventing the mirror or developing the visibility improvement concept. When the Army announced the Visibility Improvement Initiative to tank units, when they authorized the distribution of optical modification kits, the official communication described the innovation as emerging from tank crews in the field, as a collective problem-solving effort rather than as the work of any specific individual. Tommy's name didn't appear in any official documentation. His contribution was acknowledged only informally, through the gratitude and respect of his crew members and the tank crews that adopted his design and fabricated their own versions. Tommy seemed unconcerned about the lack of official recognition or formal military credit. In a letter to his family from late 1944, he wrote in his practical, straightforward manner, "The mirrors are working well. Other crews are building them now. The Army is supporting it officially. I don't need anyone to know that I invented it. What matters is that it's helping keep tank crews alive. That's enough for me. That's all that should matter to any of us. Survival. Keeping people alive." The mirror modification continued throughout the final months of the European campaign and through the end of the war in the Pacific. Tank crews continued to install mirrors, to improve visibility, to benefit from the tactical advantages the simple device provided. The mirror became part of tank culture, something that experienced crews knew about and used effectively. New crew members learned to use mirrors during training. The innovation spread through the tank corps, becoming standard practice without being officially mandated through formal directives. Tommy Hartley continued serving as a tank gunner through the end of the war. He survived combat operations in Europe, participated in multiple engagements, saw combat in various regions, and returned home safely in 1945. When he left the Army and returned to civilian life, he resumed work as a mechanic. He got married, raised a family, lived a quiet life in Detroit. He never capitalized on his wartime innovation. He never tried to patent the mirror design. He never pursued recognition for his invention. He never wrote about the mirror or gave interviews about its development. Margaret, Tommy's daughter, remembered her father as a quiet man who didn't talk much about his war service or his wartime achievements. He would occasionally mention the mirror when we were discussing mechanical problems, Margaret told me. He seemed pleased that it had worked, that it had helped tank crews survive, but he never seemed to need recognition for it. He was satisfied knowing that the innovation had been useful, that other people had benefited from it. That was enough for him. That was all he wanted. Tommy lived until 1997, passing away at 73 years old, never having received any official recognition for his wartime innovation. His family kept his sketches, his letters, the photographs that documented the mirror. They preserved the memory of what he'd created, even though the broader world had forgotten that Tommy Hartley was responsible for the visibility improvement mirror that had been adopted by tank units throughout the European campaign. The mirror survived Tommy as well. Tank crews continued using mirrors for visibility improvement throughout subsequent wars and military operations. The basic principle, using reflective surfaces to extend visibility and provide situational awareness, became standard military practice. Similar principles were applied to other military vehicles and equipment, but nobody connected the innovation to Tommy Hartley, the Detroit mechanic who had fabricated the first mirror in 1944 using salvaged materials and mechanical skill. The tank crew photograph of Tommy Hartley and his crew was almost lost to history, preserved only because it had been stored carefully in a barn and eventually discovered during an estate sale more than 70 years after it was taken. I spent months researching Tommy's story, tracking down surviving family members through genealogical research, obtaining military records through official channels and archival research, interviewing tank commanders and gunners who had served with Tommy or had used mirrors similar to his design. I compiled comprehensive documentation showing that Tommy Hartley had invented the visibility improvement mirror, that the innovation had spread through tank crews organically, and that the Army had eventually recognized the value of the modification and authorized its standardization. I published the story of Tommy Hartley in military history journals. I presented the research at conferences on World War II history and military innovation. I documented the unusual story of an innovation that had emerged from the field, spread informally through military units, been officially recognized for its value, but never credited to its inventor. I created a documentary about the mirror and Tommy's contributions to tank tactics. Robert Hartley, Tommy's grandson, helped me compile comprehensive documentation about his grandfather's wartime service and his mechanical innovations. He shared his grandfather's sketches, letters, and personal papers. He provided detailed information about Tommy's mechanical background and his service in the tank corps. Robert was grateful that his grandfather's story was finally being documented and preserved, even though it came more than 50 years after Tommy's death. The U.S. Army's historians acknowledged my research findings and agreed that Tommy Hartley deserved recognition as the inventor of the field-fabricated visibility improvement mirror that had been adopted by tank units during World War II. The Army created official documentation acknowledging Tommy's contribution. They updated the historical record to note that the mirror innovation had originated from Tommy Hartley's mechanical skills and problem-solving during the European campaign. Military institutions began teaching Tommy's story as an example of practical innovation and field problem-solving. The tank crew photograph was displayed in the National WWI Museum and Library's World War II exhibit, accompanied by comprehensive contextual information about Tommy's mirror and the visibility improvement innovations that tank crews had developed in the field. Visitors could see the photograph, read about Tommy's innovation, understand how practical problem-solving by individual soldiers had contributed to military effectiveness. School groups visited the exhibit and learned about Tommy's story. Margaret Hartley Thompson, Tommy's daughter, participated in the exhibit opening. At 91 years old, she was able to see her father's contribution finally being recognized and documented. She donated her father's sketches and letters to the museum's archives, ensuring that the documentation of the mirror's design and Tommy's thought process would be preserved for future generations of researchers and students. My father would have been pleased, Margaret told me, her voice emotional. Not because he needed recognition, but because people would finally understand that innovative problem-solving often comes from individuals working in the field, not from military planners in offices. He would want people to know that tank crews solved their own problems, that soldiers understood their needs better than anyone else, and that sometimes the most important innovations come from mechanics and ordinary soldiers who care about their comrades' survival. He would be pleased that people are finally knowing that he existed, that he thought about problems, that he created solutions. The photograph of Tommy's tank crew from October 1944 now hangs in the National WWI Museum and Library's World War II exhibit. Displayed in a place of prominence where it can be studied carefully, by visitors interested in military history and wartime innovation. The photograph shows 5 men posing informally beside a Sherman tank. They're wearing tanker uniforms, standing in casual military bearing that suggests both professionalism and camaraderie. One of the men, Tommy Hartley, holds a small mirror in his hands. The mirror is barely visible in the black and white photograph, just a small reflective object that might be overlooked if you didn't know to look for it, if you didn't understand its significance. But now that the story is known, now that Tommy's contribution has been documented and preserved, the photograph takes on profound meaning. The mirror becomes the visual anchor for a story of practical problem solving, of an innovation that emerged from field experience, of a soldier who created something valuable without seeking recognition for it. The photograph shows what was visible: a tank gunner holding the simple device he'd invented to solve a visibility problem that the Army's official systems had failed to address effectively. The photograph also shows what wasn't immediately visible: Tommy's mechanical skill, his understanding of optical principles, his ability to visualize a solution to a complex tactical problem. The photograph shows his willingness to work on his own time, to use his own creativity, to solve problems without waiting for official authorization or formal directives. The photograph shows a soldier who cared about his crew's survival and about the survival of other tank crews. The photograph captures someone engaged in practical innovation, in solving real problems through mechanical understanding and creative thinking. Standing before the photograph in the museum, visitors read the contextual information and understand that this unremarkable-looking tank crew had been part of something important. They understand that the small mirror in Tommy's hands changed how tank crews operated, changed visibility capabilities, changed survivability. They understand that innovation sometimes comes from unexpected places, from individual soldiers working in the field, from people who understand practical problems and who are willing to create solutions without seeking recognition. The photograph is a testament to Tommy Hartley's quiet genius, to his willingness to work on a problem that concerned him, to his satisfaction in knowing that his innovation had been useful and had helped others. It's a photograph of an ordinary soldier doing extraordinary problem-solving work, of a mechanic applying his skills to a military problem, of someone who created something valuable and then let others take it forward without needing credit or recognition. Robert Hartley attended the museum exhibition and stood before the photograph of his grandfather. He seemed moved by finally seeing his grandfather's contribution properly documented and displayed. "My grandfather would have been happy to see this," Robert said quietly, his voice emotional. "Not for the recognition, but because the story is preserved. Because people will know that Tommy Hartley existed, that he thought about problems, that he created solutions. That's what he would have wanted. For people to know that he mattered, that his work mattered, even if his name wasn't attached to the innovation for most of history." The tank crew photograph will remain on display for future generations to see, to study, to learn from. The mirror that Tommy Hartley invented, though no longer present in physical form, is preserved in the story of the photograph. The innovation lives on in military history, documented and attributed to its actual creator. The invisible innovation that had been attributed to nobody, that had spread organically through tank units, that had changed how tank crews operated, is finally visible, finally acknowledged, finally credited to the mechanic from Detroit who had the mechanical skill and the ingenuity to create it. Tommy Hartley's photograph is a testament to the power of practical problem solving, to the value of individual initiative, to the importance of recognizing contributions even when those contributions come from ordinary soldiers working in field conditions. The photograph shows a man who was brilliant in an understated way, who created something important, and who was satisfied knowing that his creation helped others survive. It's a photograph of someone who understood that innovation isn't always about seeking credit. Sometimes it's about solving problems because the problems matter. That is a different kind of heroism, the heroism of practical innovation, of caring enough about a problem to work on solving it, of creating something valuable and then allowing others to use it without needing personal credit. It's a heroism that often goes unrecognized, but it changes wars, saves lives and proves that genius doesn't always come from military planners or official channels. Sometimes it comes from a mechanic in a tank turret holding a small mirror and understanding how reflection could extend visibility and save lives. The photograph shows all of this. The photograph testifies to Tommy Hartley's existence, his contribution, his quiet genius. The photograph, finally displayed, finally contextualized, finally explained, is Tommy's story. It's the story of innovation born from necessity, of problem-solving born from caring about other people's survival, of genius born from practical mechanical understanding and the willingness to work on problems that matter.